think the next thing is that we'll just look at the shapes of this reflection. First, I want it to be reflecting vertically. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense if there's a lot of like angles in here, because it's above the reflection where the source is happening. This light area kind of almost coincides with this reflection over here. Same for here. It's a little bit more subtle on this side perhaps, but so areas like this where there's a lot of stuff to sort of work, maybe you can pick out some of the darker spots already with just a stump. I think the goal is to sort of slightly even out the tone before you work to the dot picking stage. You can also use the brush, might be a little bit more gentle in removing than the stump. So we're sort of, maybe we could say I'm trying to render with the brush and stump at this point, but of course like it's still gonna leave some patchiness. But this is way more efficient than just sort of tackling this entire area by dot picking. We're also getting a bit more picky with the articulation of this reflection here. Also want to bump the value a little bit. There's a little bit of reflection up here where the base of the skull is, but it's a lot lighter than the rest. So perhaps we can just mush it in a little bit. Make the value difference a little bit obvious. The thing we can do with dot picking then is just make those things more precise in the end. I think mushing is going to be needed here as well, where we don't want to actually push the reflection out anymore, but rather we want to sort of contain it a little bit over here. So going a little bit of back and forth here will, I think, help us out a little bit. Get something a little bit more even to look at. Also, we want it to darken slightly towards the bottom, so we can use the sponge end for that. On this side too, we want to have a little bit of a gradation. Surface is slightly shiny. That means basically it's not a sharp reflection that we're seeing, it's slightly diffuse. And so it starts getting more soft the further we go from the source of the reflection. So this side we can leave a bit firmer than this side. And we want to communicate that, of course, as always, with the viewer. It's these little things that sort of really push that realism to the next level. All these tiny optical things. All right, so maybe the first approach could be that we just slightly tone in these lighter bits that are sort of standing out of the average value of the area. My point is a little bit dull now, so I'm gonna switch the charcoal up. If you're working a small worm like that we're seeing over here, and you find that nothing's happening when you're scrubbing it, then it's probably that the point is too dull and then sort of grabbing onto the tops of the paper texture instead of going in between them, and you can't reach the place you would like to tone in. So I'm not going to do this on the background, I'm just going to do this on the reflection. The background is, you know, sufficiently made, I want to say, to sort of support the cast. So I'm not going to render that actually. That's just, I think, a waste of your time and mine. So my approach here, because I'm working on this, you know, large area of the reflection, is I'm not going to switch between, you know, the charcoal and the eraser all the time. Instead, I'm just sort of working on a larger section, just filling in anything that seems a bit lighter than its surrounding, and then the next thing I'll do is I'll go around and pick everything that is darker than the things around them, and then eventually we'll be arriving at a nice tone that is fairly flat and nice to look at, instead of, you know, a somewhat messy looking thing that we have right now. So perhaps we can start going over, maybe I'm working on the bottom section first, a little bit more at least. And just go in and pick out the dark bits. And we're going to create some light bits at the same time. We just got to go back and forth a little bit. It's not a very efficient process. Sometimes it goes very quickly and smoothly, but sometimes you're going to go back and forth a lot. So I think it sort of depends a little bit on the tone we're working with as well. The darker you go, usually the lighter the mark you leave with this eraser, no matter what you do. And that means you're going to have to go back and darken some things with more precision to the right value the next time. So you understand the approach. I'll just work a little bit without talking too much. So while you're doing this, remember to squint a lot, you know, check if the values are still working on the average. And that way you can also spot out those areas that are sort of separating from the rest. If you're looking at it with open eyes all the time, you'll just start to sort of zoom in into these small white worms and black dots that you see, and you might lose the big picture. As always, we're trying to create some kind of gradation over here. So it's important to sort of figure out the big picture, you know, lighter to darker, and maintain that while you're working. So dot picking easily, you just sort of zoom in and start working on a small area, and you suddenly notice, you know, it's a different value from the rest because you just didn't look at the big picture. So we're working towards something, not just picking at the values and, you know, scrubbing away at the drawing for no reason. We're trying to make the values more flat and accurate. The sort of downside of this type of working is the more you work at it, the more it will usually reveal these smaller inconsistencies, and you just have to decide where your limit is, you know. As you could honestly spend a year on this piece and like working an hour or two a day or something, and not have it finished by the end of the year if you just go down into the micro level of things. So, and this isn't meant to, of course, like discourage you from trying out this type of project yourself. Might take you a little bit longer, but you don't have to go like the full academic, you know, dot pick every square centimeter of the drawing. Just do whatever you think you need from this project. If you feel you've sort of figured out charcoal and how the tools work, perhaps it's time to move along. You know, this exercise is about learning to manipulate the edges. For one thing, as a new thing, of course, just hone your drawing skills, hone your eye. But, you know, if your end game isn't to just sort of work in an academic way as a career, more so hone your basic skills, then I really don't see the point in just spending like a month or two on a piece like this. It's a lot of effort. So you have to think what you want to get out of this project, I think. Try to be sort of cerebral about the things you are trying to learn. One thing to mention, when you're working like this, you need to take even more breaks, but instead of a break, you can also work on a different area. So you can see the area you previously worked with fresh eyes and start picking up those things that aren't working. And I'm talking like, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like this per area, I want to say. So you could work on here, and then you could work here or here, but in the same region, but at least just stare at a different sort of focused area for a while, and that will probably allow your eyes to rest a little bit from the area you stared at previously and pick up some new things. But this type of sort of very picky work with very flat values, similar to on a smaller scale, the value scale you probably did or maybe didn't do yet, but that's one of the goals of that exercise as well, is to create clean, even values and hone your eye to actually see the smaller discrepancies between those. This is in a way a kind of wax on wax off style of learning that as well, even if you're working towards a nice finished drawing as a result. So the background and table and stuff like this, where you're just working on large areas and trying to clean those up, is definitely that kind of an exercise. Now that I've worked on this for a while here, you can start to really see the difference in the texture between this area and this area. And it's starting to be pretty obvious that this is way less refined than this side of things. So probably I'll just work a little bit on this transition, but then I'll just call it quits on this this side of the reflection. Maybe just check the transitions to the background and stuff like that. But yeah, the goal isn't to work on this forever, but rather just clean it up enough to get a nice clean look to it. It is a pretty like eye-catching area here, so even though we try to make everything soft and all that good stuff, so shouldn't grab too much attention, but it's still like a big part of the in terms of like surface area, even like a big part of the drawing. I think it's worthwhile to put a little bit of effort into it, at least, even if it's not like the star of the show by any means. But just seeing if I can get this any smoother. Yeah, I don't think I should touch it much more than this with the brush. It's not really progressing the drawing. More so just pushing it too light or too dark, or modifying the shapes too much or something like that. So I think it's just something we have to accept, that dot picking is the only way to like pure refinement from here. Anything else will just shuffle things around with sort of give you the semblance of change for the better, but in reality you're just always adding new texture to the paper if you're just sort of mindlessly wiping it with a brush. But I had to try. I think it's good to sort of see if there's a more efficient way to handle things, but in this case it's just elbow grease, I guess. This is effectively a thing you're gonna have to face with any charcoal drawing you make, unless you work on smooth paper, in which case you're just sacrificing a bit of value range for the final drawing. Like your darkest bits are going to be something like this, so in contrast to the Rembrandt stuff, just appears a little bit, gray. So we can slightly work this edge with the brush, so we don't have to dot pick absolutely everything, but also it's generally just easier to soften things with the stick rather than the eraser. So think I'm reaching a point where I have to take a break. I've been dot picking for a while now, so I had to first sharpen all my things and let my body and eye get a rest. It really does get taxing when my eye level is somewhere around here and I have to work down here without getting in the way of the camera. So okay, hopefully final session of this drawing project. So I'll keep working this a little bit, but I think it's already reading pretty well when I was looking at it from a distance. So this edge is way too sharp. I'll soften that a little bit, but I'll just keep working on some bits of this darker stuff over here. One thing we want to address is the highlight on the table edge. We'll do that for the final thing of the project, I think. Okay, I think you get the point that this is an endless road basically. If you go very deep into this dot picking of the background, this is just a small portion. Imagine just doing the whole background. Feel free to do yours, but I won't be doing more than this for the background. So I'll just scrub away a little bit at the front highlight and then I'll call it for this project. Yeah, because I mean, there's still a lot of squiggles and a lot of dots to pick out there, but yeah, every time you clean an area up, it's like, hooray, you unlocked a new level of dot picking and you just find more discrepancies and you just do it for a while, like I did for around 20 minutes right now, an hour before that, and we achieved this level of refinement. But you know, you could do 10 hours with this area only, and yeah, it might look slightly better, but you know, it's diminishing returns for sure. And I'll just be picking out some of the highlight stuff for the front and then we'll be calling it. For once, the camera helped me out by forcing me to take a break by turning off right when I needed one. So at least there's that. But yeah, this is the final session. I'll just work on the front edge a little bit more here. I think this side is looking quite good already. Want to maintain that some kind of gradation. Also, I just wanted to clean this up a little bit. Just make it a continuous kind of gradation instead of, or at least somewhat, instead of the kind of messy placeholder we had before. So. Just added a little bit of variety to the front as well, you know, gradating a little bit from left to right. So yeah, I think it's a nice place to call it done. I think all that's left is to sign it. So perhaps we'll do it here. I'll just pick it out like it's sort of carved in. Okay, just because it's a signature doesn't mean you shouldn't take your time with it. It's gonna stay there for a long while. So I even dot pick that. But yeah, it's worthwhile. All right, I hope this was an instructive demonstration. That was a lot of dot picking by the end. And yeah, the charcoal figure demo will be done slightly differently. The principles will stay the same, but I think I'll use less tools and more hatching techniques to give you guys another sort of approach to how to use charcoal, just to provide some variety. And I will be releasing these, this demo as well as the sort of introductory videos for the charcoal stuff as one block, and then I'll be adding the figure thing later, just so you get your hands on the footage a bit faster, because otherwise I'll just be postponing the whole release a little bit, because I want to enjoy summer a little bit as well. All right, I think it came out nice. I'll be fixing this drawing as well, and I'll be making a separate video for that as well, so you know how to take care of your charcoal after it's finished. Well, I'll see you in the next video.